welcome each and every one of us once more. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of our WhatsApp Talk program. This is organized by the Child Abuse Prevention Movement. I am Fiona Luma, and I will be your moderator for today. So for those joining the call, if this is your very first time joining this child abuse prevention movement, we have a simple mission, which is to raise awareness of child abuse through educational talk like this and through inspired action. The overall theme that is guiding us throughout this series is how individuals, communities, and organizations across the world can take responsibility in keeping children safe. And each week we will be exploring this theme from various angles with various experts and advocates all over the world. So you are welcome for this session. We've had episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, and now this is episode 4. This is really very amazing, for we are going bigger and stronger. And our speaker for today is Savasia. She is a graduate of international studies and diplomacy. And she is very passionate about humanitarian and development affairs. And she is a supporter and a believer in children's rights. And this our speaker for this evening has once worked as a child protection officer at the UNHCR. This is really amazing, for we are so sure that whatever she will be sharing with us here is hands-on experience. And she is also a lover of God and a lover of people. This is so amazing. So our topic for this episode 4 is the impact of parental education on child rearing practices. This is so amazing, and I'm so excited to hear what our speaker has to share with us based on her experience, her background. She really has a lot for us to reflect on today. And so I don't know if our speaker is already present and ready.
Hi, I am ready. Thank you. I'm here.
Oh, thank you so
much. Here, first and foremost, I want to thank my friend Veronica for inviting me to this platform. I just want to, first of all, just if anybody on here is or is not on LinkedIn, the power of LinkedIn is really powerful. Isn't LinkedIn, or if you are on LinkedIn and you haven't yet connected with the organization, it's called Child Abuse Prevention Movement. So if you've not connected with them on LinkedIn, I would implore you to go ahead and do that. It's really amazing work that they're doing. And so this evening, we're going to be talking about parental education and child rearing practices. As you heard from Fiona, my name is Savatia. I'm not going to go over my introduction a lot because I think she's done that for me, and I appreciate that. So we'll just go on ahead and go directly. Did somebody want to say something? Okay. Not okay. Yes. So we'll just go ahead and go straight into this topic. And I think it's a very necessary topic. And I loved, when Veronica suggested this topic. And the reason is because, the biggest people who have an impact on children's lives, or as children turn out into adulthood, the biggest people who have the biggest impact is parents or child caregivers. Whoever takes care of a child, that's the first impact that they have on a child's life. So this topic is so important, and we'll just go straight ahead into it. So parental education on child rearing practices. What's the impact of that? So we'll just start by a few definitions. Some of them are more obvious, but I always tell people anytime I'm called to be a speaker, or present anything, my style of presentation and my style of teaching is I always, teach and engage in a way as if assuming that not everybody is so aware of what we're talking about. So I might define even the most obvious things, but just in case there's somebody here who does not have a good understanding of a concept, that's why I'll always, at least take time to give a few definitions in a layman's language so we're all on the same page, because the goal is to make impact. So we can make impact if people don't even know what we're talking about. So I'll go ahead and parental education. What exactly is parental education? And when I looked at this topic, first of all, I started one way, and then in the middle of this, I realized, hold on, parental education has like two angles to it, because it's first the background of the parent, like what the parent knows from before, the education that that parent brings, whatever knowledge they have obtained from the past, how they were brought up. So everything that was already quote unquote poured into them as a form of education and knowledge. So that's parental education. And they're bringing that into the child rearing or the child, child raising, basically. So we're looking at the past, the level of education that the parents themselves have obtained from the past, or I also like to look at it as the future, the current or the future. It's either that or it's the programs and training that they currently have access to teach them on parenting skills, like sessions like this. So this is like, this could be parental education for some of you over here. So when you think parental education and the effects on child rearing practices, think the past, where that parent is coming from, what has already been instilled in them, and also now what they currently have access to or not. Do they have access to certain things right now? Because then that will impact the future of, how they raise their children. And I just want to say first that, most parents, at least most parents I know, they will always want what is best for their child. And so even when you look at a parent and you feel like their method of child rearing is extreme, like this is so wrong, even if you ever see a parent who is in that, who is doing it from that angle, I want us to look at them from a point of grace, from a lens of grace, like give grace even to such parents. The reason I'm saying this is because, as I've said, most parents will always want what is best for their child. So we're going to look at this topic today, not from an accusatory point of view, but from a lens of grace, right? And so that basically is parental education. And just important to know that parental education will always influence directly child protection, directly, not indirectly, but very directly. And child protection, for anyone who's wondering, we're looking at the safeguarding of children's rights, their safety, their well-being, and their development, right? So what is child rearing? We're done with parental education. Now we're looking at child rearing. And these are just basically the strategies and methods that parents use. It's such a layman's term, actually. I feel like it's in the term itself. It's just the strategies and methods that the parents and caregivers use for their desired outcome in the life of a child. Children and child protection, let it be clear that, according to the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child that was established in 1989, a child is basically considered, at least according to the UN, as any human who is below the age of 18, unless there's local laws applicable to that child that state otherwise. For example, if somebody is in a country called, I don't know, maybe Uganda, and the Uganda law says that, a child is 16 and below, then that child is considered an adult in Uganda up to 16 years old. But just generally, world over, up to age 18, that's a child. And so it's just also important to realize that the child rearing outcomes, how a child is raised, the outcome of that will always be physical, emotional, socioeconomic, and psychological. But the ultimate goal of child rearing should always be, the goal should always be to ensure balanced children emotionally, intellectually, physically, and just developmentally. Just we're trying to ensure stability for children. And the reason is because the children of today are adults of tomorrow, right? So you ever seen a child and you're just like considering their future and you're like, oh God, if this child, if nothing changes in the life of this child, it's not looking good for them in future, right? So yeah, the ultimate goal will always be, to ensure that stability, because the child today is the adult of tomorrow. That's the person, that's the adult that society will have to deal with. So what kind of adult are we looking at raising? So we start in childhood. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit on why I feel like this topic is so, so important. Some statistics from here in the US, and I mean, if anybody wants, I can always send where I got the statistics from. But like, there is a US report here in 2022, that's only 3 years ago. And that report showed that 88% of abused children were abused by their own people, by their own parents. 88%. Like, that's insane. So most abuse will always go on in the home. And apart from parents, it will always be somebody that they know, a teacher, a coach, an uncle, an aunt. So it's so important to realize that, child abuse happens with people who are closest to them. And sometimes these are parents, stroke caregivers, whoever is raising them. And that's why this very topic of today is so important, that why parents, what are parents pouring into children? What are the caregivers pouring into this children? So this is so important because 88% of abused children in the US in 2022 were by parents, right? And another statistic is that the highest form of abuse normally for any abused children is actually neglect. There's different forms of neglect. Not neglect. There's different forms of abuse. We have physical abuse, we have emotional abuse, but also there is neglect of a child. And it's just a wide topic in itself. But that in itself is, it's a very interesting statistic that we'll get into, like neglect of a child. And neglect doesn't just mean, leaving a child to do whatever. Neglect would mean like, your child is not going to school. That is exactly a form of neglect, because a parent is supposed to ensure that their child has an education. So if a child is not being educated, they're being left at home, that's a form of neglect, and that's the highest form of abuse. Also, a 2010 report here that was done here in the US, again, it showed that children who are abused were 11 times, 11, that's a very high number. They're 11 times likely to engage in criminal behavior as adults. 11 times, not 2 times as much, but that means, like, unless something changes, the odds are very high that this child will engage in criminal behavior as an adult, right? And if I may add, I'd say also that, they're bound to engage in a lot of self-sabotage behavior. Criminal behavior is like the extreme, but just even on a less extreme basis, I'd say they're also more likely to engage in self-sabotage behavior. I myself, I'm standing here and I can say, I've had some self-sabotage behaviors as a person. And I don't know, you don't have to, but if any of you can open your mic and just agree or disagree. Like, do any of you ever look at yourself and realize they're just habits that you have in your life that you just know this habit is harmful, but when you actually look at it, it's like a direct link of how you were raised as a child, and they call it childhood trauma, right? I don't know, does any of you, if any of you can relate, just let me know, like to some sort of childhood trauma or some sort of, when you look at yourself, you're just like, okay, this, some people, you look at yourself and you're like, oh, wow, I really have self-esteem issues. Some people look at themselves and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm a mean person. Oh my gosh, I'm an angry person. Like, you just look at your own life and you're like, oh my gosh, this, you're actually talking about, me. So if any of you can relate to that, yeah, do let me know. But I know a lot of us can.
Yes,
right? Exactly. Yeah. Like, you look at yourself and you're like, my gosh, I'm an angry person. Or And if you're even being more honest, you're like, I'm a mean person. And sometimes, have you ever, and it's such a sad thing to just look at this person and you're like, why are they always angry all the time? Have you ever just seen parents who they cannot pass any information to their child without shouting it out? And I'm like, but this is a child, don't shout. You don't need to keep, But sometimes, unfortunately, we are those people. And I'm so glad, if any of you can relate to this, I'm so glad that you showed up today, because this is us changing the narrative of the past. Now, also, I'm just kind of getting into it as we're going. I also want to say that there is a big correlation between, culturally, that is, there's a very thin line between abuse and discipline. When we were growing up, some of us thought our parents want to kill us, because it's like, do you hate me? Do you hate me, or do you not? Do you love me? Because that's because there's a very thin line between abuse and discipline. And that's why I said at the beginning, we're going to look at this from a lens of grace. A lens of grace. The reason is because even some of our own parents raised us exactly like the way we're going to talk about. Because to them, they're thinking, I'm disciplining this child, but it's actually psychological and emotional abuse. If you ever grew up being constantly told how, can't you ever get anything right? Like, what's wrong with you? You just keep doing the wrong things. Believe it or not, in due time you'll start losing esteem in yourself to do the right thing. You'll always start questioning yourself. You'll always start second guessing yourself. I had a person close to me. So on Friday, I was talking to a person close, very close to me, and they were talking to me because, and actually when they called me, it was a WhatsApp call on Friday. And when they called me, this is exactly what they said. They said, hey, I just want to run something by you. And I said, okay. And they were like, and I just want you to tell me, this is what I want to do, but does it make me a bad person if I do this? So they were asking for my opinion, but they were also asking me to validate, like, if they take that action, does it make them a bad person? And I told them, why are you questioning your goodness or your badness in this matter? And they were like, well, over the last 1 year, it's like everything I've been doing has been considered wrong by everyone. Everything I've been saying has been considered wrong by everyone around me. Now, this is a grown adult. Do you know what I'm saying? And this is why I'm saying this story, because this is an adult. She's almost 40, under 40. She's in her 30s. So this is a grown adult who is saying that in the last 1 year, she's felt like the closest people around her have always, have made her feel like she's such a bad person. So how much more for children, How much more that child whose mind is not fully developed? Actually, they say a child's mind, yes, we say that a child is a child up to age 18, but by psychological standards, a child's brain development isn't fully developed until around age 25. Has anybody heard of this statistic? That a child's, that's why they say, like, sometimes they're like, oh, girls, you shouldn't get married early, girls and boys, because, up to age 25, you're basically still, your brain is still developing. So this thin line between abuse and discipline, because what parents are doing, they're thinking, oh, I'm doing this, I'm taking this action in discipline of my child, but no, it's not. Now, remember we're talking about, parental education. So knowledge and education, just generally, it increases the potential for protecting children's right and a safe environment for children. And I'm about to get into that shortly. So there's a direct correlation between how educated parents versus how uneducated parents will pour into their children, how they'll bring up their children. There's a very direct correlation between educated parents will have a more gentle and a more informed approach to how they're raising children. And uneducated parents, you'll also see, as I go down into this presentation, you will see how those two completely differ, and when we're saying uneducated parents, it's not necessarily, uneducated, like didn't get an education, but just even parents who have, as we said, access to certain skills and trainings to help them, get better at parenting, right? So also according to a UNICEF report, there's a direct correlation again between poverty and abuse, very direct. Okay, let's look at it this way. Children who are in poverty are much more likely, by the way, to face abuse and neglect. And it's in such subtle ways, and that's why I said every parent wants what's best for themselves. But a mother in the village somewhere who has 9 children, 8 children, first of all, think about this education, and this is why I love this topic so much. I think parental education, right, or parental knowledge and training and skills. Think about this. First of all, this parent has 8 children, and they're in pure poverty. But the reason why they have 8, 9, 10 children, it's because they're not even knowledgeable on something called family planning, right? So their knowledge on family planning is not even there. So they're first not able to take care of just 2 children, or 1 child is already had enough for them. But ultimately you're like, my goodness, why is this mother, why does she keep on, this mother and father, why do they keep on bringing children into the world when obviously they're just bringing these children here suffer? But it's because they don't even, this woman doesn't even understand anything to do with period, safe days. I don't know if there are any men in this conversation, and if they are, I'm pretty sure everybody is an adult. So, these people are not even aware of, how to measure a woman's safe days versus unsafe days. Don't understand like exactly what is family planning methods that exist, so they don't even have access to that. So first of all, on top of that, they're not even aware of family planning, so they might just keep rearing children till the Lord comes. They really, really are feeling the earth and multiplying. But now think about that. They have 9 children, and their oldest is like 12 or 13. Do you know who's going to become a second parent to all her other 9 children or 8 children? It's that 13-year-old. Whoever is the oldest children. Remember, this is still a child. At just 12, this child, because of the parents' lack of education and lack of knowledge on certain things, things as simple as family planning, for example, because of the lack of that. So what I'm saying is we're seeing a ripple effect here, right? And so this parent delegates parental duties to their 12-year-old. So the 12-year-old begins taking care of the 1-year-old. The 9-year-old is taking care of the 4-year-old. The 7-year-old is taking care of the 1-year. It's crazy. It's crazy. And it's like there's no choice over here. If anything, they just leave the child with them. They're like, hey, you take care of your siblings. Maybe if they're lucky, I've left some beans on the pot. I'm going to find, some work, because these are parents all fighting to survive. So just like that, a child who's 12 years old is supposed to be going to school, but they're not going to school because, first of all, they're also a caregiver in their own home. So they're staying home, taking care of their other siblings, or in even worse circumstances, they're joining their parents in helping to fend for the family, because what the family is getting is not enough. So this child, they're not being a child, they're not in school. So I'm first of all capturing now education of the child in direct relation to education of the parent. So the lack, it's such a sad state of affairs. When we look at it, it's such a sad, and again, reminding us that we're looking at this from a point of grace. Even that parent who is delegating parental duties to their child, they don't really see how wrong this is. They're just like, you're 12 years old, you're a grown up, you need to be helping here and there. So just like that, this child is already missing out on education. And even if they still get the opportunity to go to school, of course, there'll be a direct difference between that child who's going to school and still going to work with their parents and still taking care of their siblings, versus that child whose only responsibility is go to school and learn. I'm providing for you education, I'm providing for you, you have your school fees, you have food, all you have to go is all you have to do is go to school and learn. Are you already seeing how, like, it's such a direct, this parental education thing versus child rearing, it's a very, you can always clearly see the difference between the education of a parent and lack of education in the parent. You'll always see the direct implication between the two children. These two children will come out so differently, you know. But of course, you know, every child, some children just have it in them to fight. And there are many children, and maybe even some of you on this call have been that child who've grown up with a parent who didn't have any better to offer them, but they still turned out right. They still beat the odds. And if there's anybody over here, like, you know, I really applaud you. I really applaud if you're that person that I'm talking about, that you grew up in. I don't know if there's anyone like that over here. You can just open your mic and say that you did. And if so, I really applaud you. If you're the person who I'm talking about, you grew up under very harsh conditions that were against you, but you still beat the odds, and, you know, here you are. So if that's you, like, I really, really do applaud you. And you can just let us know that you really did. Okay. So now regarding something like health, again, let's think of health, for example. You know, like, when I was a child and I used to hate it and I didn't understand why. I was brought up by my grandparents and my aunties and uncles. So I remember clearly being a young child, and every so often, I don't know if it was every month, every few weeks, but I just remember, can anybody remember being a child and just every so often you used to be taken to the hospital and you get a shot, and all you remember about that day is crying your heart out, right? Does any of you remember those things? And then now as an adult, you realize, oh, those were immunizations that were, you had to get those immunizations. Can anyone relate to that, by the way? Just let me know.
Absolutely can.
Right? Exactly. So as a child, you didn't know. You just realized every so often your mother used to carry you to the hospital, right? And you're like, why am I here? You just go get a shot, you cry, and you go home. But if you can remember correctly, you were not sick at that time. You weren't sick. You were just being taken to hospital. Exactly. But now as an adult, you're like, oh, those were immunizations. And thank God that your parents were knowledgeable enough to know that, oh, immunization is a necessary thing. And here's why actually I love what CAPM, this movement, is doing, because there's a place for organizations like this. The reason I say this is because some of the polio vaccines that we got as a child, I remember when we used to go to hospital, there used to be these flyers on the wall that says, you vaccinate your child against polio, vaccinate your child against measles, vaccinate. There's a lot of vaccinate, malaria. And all these were actually brought to us by organizations, not necessarily big organizations, of course, organizations like USAID, but even small grassroots like CBOs, community-based organizations. Some of them actually used to be the ones responsible to come around and knock on doors and say, hey, do you have a child? Anyone who can relate, you can tell me this. Do you ever have people knocking at your door and saying, hey, do you have a child who's under the age of 5? Just trying to find out, oh, have they gotten the immunization? And the parent is like, no, I don't even know what you're talking about. So these days are a very big place for organizations like CPM. And any one of you who's here today, I really applaud you for supporting this movement. And just, if you can, if you ever have a neighbor, I don't know where you live, but I just want to I want to encourage you, if you ever have a neighbor who, you know, you can tell that, you know, they're not as privileged or as educated as you to understand the concept of immunization, and they have a child, just one day start a conversation with them like, oh, by the way, how old is your child? Oh, 5 months, 6 months, whatever. Or have they been immunized? Though I'd also say that hospitals are doing a good job. Hospitals are also doing a good job with ensuring that, you know, the first time a mother goes into hospital, she's made aware of, oh, this is what I need you to do for your child. Bring them here after 6 weeks for this shot. And then when they go, they're told, okay, now bring them. So the hospitals are also doing a good job. But us as well, anyone who's on here on this call, it would be nice if you ever have a neighbor or somebody, a cousin, an auntie who's in the village, and you can tell they're not really well educated as far as these things, you can always just check. You might just find that they have no idea, and this child is missing out on very important immunization. Psychological and socioeconomic, these are some of the ones that I've mentioned, whereby the child is also being a provider of the family. The child is going out to look for food, you know, aka work with their parents, right? and they should be children being children, but the parent is making them, come join me, let's go and see how we'll eat tonight, right? And psychologically also, this is the same parent who, psychologically, there is there's an impact that a parent's words, and this one I know almost 100% of us on this call can relate to parents' words. When your parent just told you one thing, or a teacher just told you one thing, and you stayed and you're like up to date, you're maybe in your 20s, you're in your older 20s, younger 20s, 30s, even 40s, but up to date, there's one word maybe that your parent told you that has never left you. And unfortunately, even in your adulthood, that very same voice, that very same word, every time you want to go for something, you always remember, oh, my parents said that I am not this, or my parent always thought that I am not good enough for this. I don't have the best voice. I am not the smartest in the room. And so even when you get opportunities, sometimes, unfortunately, you have self-sabotaged, right? You have self-sabotage because of parental words. So that's like the psychological effect of the mind. And unfortunately, it's a very sad thing. So now I want us to go into this thing called gentle parenting. If any of you have heard of this on social media, thank God for social media. In the last few years, this was not really a concept in Africa, but in the last few years, it has started being more common in Africa because of social media, that there is a thing called gentle parenting. And I always hear all of us laughing and saying, oh, if you were brought up in Africa, you did not grow up with gentle parenting at all. You did not grow up with gentle, like, what is gentle parenting? You're like, this is a white people thing. However, over time, we've come to start accepting that, no, it's not a white people thing. It's actually a good thing, because gentle parenting is not to say do not discipline the child. It's to say, acknowledge that the words that you speak into your child, how you relate with your child, is having a lifelong impact on their brain, because remember, their brain is still developing. So if you push it in the mind of a child that they are not good enough at a young age, and you repeat this for 18 years of their life, by the time they're going into adulthood, this is an adult who will fight to believe they're good enough. Some people will overcome it, some people will get to 60. I'm always seeing it on social media in the comment section, someone saying, yeah, I'm 60 years old, but I still struggle to say no to people. I'm 60 years old, but I still struggle to do this. I'm 70, I'm 50, and I'm like, wow, you're 50 and you're still struggling to say no. But it's a thing. It's that something that has been drilled into your mind for 18 years is a bit hard to undo, right? So, but I want us to, to take on this concept of gentle parenting as a welcome thing in Africa. Because in Africa, let's be honest, half of us, if not all of us here, I don't know if there's anybody here who can really say they were really raised with proper gentle parenting. Maybe to a good extent somehow. And if you did, you're blessed. However, we are here to change the narrative, about this gentle parenting thing. So let's look at it. What exactly is gentle parenting? We're looking at how do caregivers and how do parents communicate. You have to listen to the needs of the child. You have to offer praise. You have to give feedback with love. It's not good for any of us or for any parent to tell their child. It's not good for us, any of us, to tell our children. There's just certain words that they're not to be passed down. Do you know, unfortunately, this thing is a generational cycle repeating itself. Again, parental education, like how our parents raised, however they were raised, they're repeating that right now, right? That parental education, the way we defined it at the beginning, and we said it's based on every knowledge that they have from the past, and that's what they're pouring into their children, right? So every knowledge that they have, and that's what exactly they're pouring into their children's lives, right? So how parents communicate, there is a way to be, don't be an authoritative parent. Be a parent who is more communicative with your child. Don't tell a child, obey because I said so. And me, I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say, I grew up with this concept of do this because I said so. Do this because I said so. So, so we're talking about how do you communicate, and then how do you discipline. I know on social media you've seen a lot of skits where parents are almost killing their children, and everyone from Africa is like, "Why? That's me. That's my parent. That's my parent." Like there's heavy beating, there's comparing you to their neighbors' children, there's guilt tripping you, like, "Oh, I carried you in my tummy for 9 months." So how do you discipline your child? Find the proper ways to discipline a child. How do you nurture a child? Are you gentle with them or are you harsh with them? Are you present or are you absent? Are you supportive or are you not? Because all these things lead to psychological abuse, which leads to trauma. How do you guide? Most parents need to guide their children by emulating. You can't tell your child you're good enough. So when they're bullied in school and they come and they tell you they are being bullied in school, and you're like, oh, well, no, that bully is a bad person. But as a parent, you're not realizing that you're that child's first bully, right? So regarding things like this, children learn by looking at what we're doing as parents. When I worked as UNHCR, as a child protection officer, there's this thing I carried out every week called a BIA, a best interest assessment. It was a form that I used to have to go to the home of a child, and I'm just basically observing how they're living. I'm talking to the child, I'm talking to the caregiver, but I have a form against which I'm ticking, like, oh, does the place look safe for the child? How does the environment look? How does the child look? Does the child look fearful of their parent or their caregiver? How are they interacting? Is this child having access to education? So, and I thought that's a very necessary. I part of my the best part of my job used to be the best part of my job used to be doing this best interest assessment, just interacting with the children and the environment and trying to ensure that indeed this is a safe environment for this child to grow. And at the end of the best interest assessment, I used to go ahead and give my recommendations, and this would be followed through by UNHCR. I was dealing with refugee children from all over East Africa, and it was a really meaningful thing to do. So in our own ways, I'm encouraging us to just have this psychological best interest regarding your own child, or even as CAPM movement. I would what is it called? I would encourage you to have some form of, the bigger you grow, the more you start being able to help out parents and children and child protection. I would encourage CAPM as a movement to consider having what are they called? BIA forms, like best interest assessment forms, right? So let's have a form of BIA, right? A best interest assessment in the future. And above all, it's so important. Parental education is so important on child rearing, because with the proper parental education, will reduce the potential for exploitation, reduce child abuse from the parents themselves, and then from other people. There are people whose children will be abused by other people, but will not have the guts to come and tell their own parent, because their own parent is also an abuser of sorts, even if it's just a psychological abuser. And they always say, if your child dares to say that they're being abused, or if you can see psychological effects of your child being abused, and if they have the guts to talk to you, the first thing you have to do, they say, is believe them. Now, as I close out, I just want to conclude by first saying, letting us know, like, what is the biggest wonder about children? The biggest wonder or awe about children is that they put so much trust in adults. They trust the world, and they're just an empty slate. Children will see the best in people. Children will see the best in the world, and children will see the best in their parents. That's why, if a parent says you're stupid and you have so much trust in your parent, then the child will believe that they're stupid. because the parent is always right, or the world is always right. So I just have a few, I'll close out by a few recommendations for CAPM as a movement and for all of us, but just this one would be more for the movement and anyone who is part of it or anyone who is thinking of doing something similar in your community or so. If you're doing any of such things, some of the recommendations, if you're not, and I don't already know what you're doing and what you're not doing, so some of this might be already things that you're doing. And if you're not, if they are good, if they're not, you can think of what will implement. One of the biggest things that any community will benefit from is anything to do with the arts, drama, music, and all. Drama, music, and the arts, these are powerful tools. Everybody will always understand a powerful message through drama, right? And then you can always invite respected parents and leaders in a community to give their own positive experiences on parenting styles. And then you can also, you can also always ensure that when you're teaching and training them, there's something called training of trainers, whereby an organization trains people in the community and those people will train and pass on that knowledge. So in your training of trainers, ensure that, you're teaching simple, actionable steps like, parents equally have to respect their children, or teaching parents about hygiene for their children, nutrition for their children, importance of education for their children, and things like those. And if at all possible, this would be my last one. I had a little more, but I'm seeing I've run out of time. But if at all it's possible in future, think of fundraisers would help. Fundraisers for the movement, so that children can be able to be protected, but also parents can be able to be set up to not be abusers to their own children. And fundraisers will always be necessary, and they'll help because, it's a just cause, it's a good cause, and many people will support a movement that is, pro children, because children ought to be protected. They trust the world, they trust their parents. So fundraising at the end of the day, to help children who are being abused and, help parents not be the abusers by creating a better environment for them. Yeah. Sorry, I think I had so much prepared that we can share together. So with all that said, if anybody has a question or if anybody would like to contribute to this conversation with the last, I think, 10 or 11 minutes we have left, yeah, I'm open to that.